before Eric introduces our guest today, I'd like you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil. And I'd like everything else off your desk. Get some water. Okay, Eric.
Great. Okay, so today we have Michael Cusmano with us, and also his mom, Diana. Come at me. So Cusmano Real Estate Group was established in 1959. It operates in the San Fernando Valley and owns large amounts of senior, residential, and commercial real estate. It was started by brothers Chuck and Roger Cusmano. Cusmano Real Estate Group partakes in leasing, property management, development, construction, and also runs as a real estate brokerage company. Altogether, Chuck, Roger, Chuck's sons Michael and Charlie, and associates run Cusmano Real Estate Group with an emphasis in keeping in touch with the local community. Let it be known that Cusmano family has donated tens of thousands of dollars to Burbank High School, Burroughs, and other schools in the district. Also, Mr. Cusmano is a member and a board of director member of the Community Foundation of the Verdugos, a charitable organization. So please lend your ears to our guest speaker for today, Uncle Cusmano.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to come speak with you for an hour today. And so I thought about some of the things that you might find interesting, because I don't have a whole lot of time, but I thought that I would touch on three different areas. And so as I'm speaking, if any of you have any questions, raise your hand, and I'll try to wait till pause and then get your questions. So, and don't be afraid if I'm not clear, if I'm going too fast or too slow, kind of give me some feedback. So the first thing that I thought that I would briefly talk about is to tell you a little bit about myself. Because for any of you that have an interest in going into business or going into finance, sort of the path that I took and some of the issues that I faced are the same issues that you will face. So how many of you think that you might be interested in going into business or finance in some way? Okay, so a pretty fair amount of you. And just like you, I attended the Burbank Unified School District. I was at Burroughs and graduated from there. So just in some ways, we kind of come from the same place. The second segment that I will touch on briefly is the concept of ethics. And I'll talk about ethics from a real world perspective. And so I have some observations. And what I'll do is I'll leave you with some questions about ethics, because I know you guys have been studying ethics, and in the classroom and in the book, it may seem really cut and dry. You do the right thing. But in the real world, I want to talk about real world application of ethics and what it will mean to you as a business person or as an employee. And then the third thing that I want to talk about that I thought you might find interesting is our business and what we do in real estate here in California. Regardless of what business you go into, real estate plays some aspect. If you're running a car dealership or working in a car dealership, somebody has to own the land. If you open a restaurant, most of the time the restaurant doesn't own the land of the building, a landlord does. And so we own and operate a lot of properties throughout Burbank and Southern California. Possible some of you may live in some of our apartments. We have a lot of apartments in this area. We own restaurants. I don't know if any of you ever go to DJ's or Elephant Bar. Those are restaurants that we've owned and developed over the years. So anyway, let me give you a little bit of background on myself. As I mentioned, I attended Burbank Unified Schools from kindergarten. I started off at Jefferson and ended up graduating from John Burroughs High School. Right out of John Burroughs, I knew that I wanted to be involved in business, in finance, and real estate. I was fortunate enough that my family business was in real estate. My dad was a real estate broker and did business here in Burbank. And so I kind of grew up in that real estate business, and I knew what I wanted to do. So right after I graduated from Burroughs. I went directly to UCLA, and I studied economics at UCLA, and ended up graduating in 1984 with a degree in economics. And while I was going to UCLA, I had an advantage over a lot of kids because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be involved in real estate. And so while I was going to UCLA, I worked in construction. So I would focus all my classes in the morning, get out by noon, grab lunch, and then go work on a construction site from 1 to 4 in the afternoon. And so I was able to learn about construction from the ground up, with a hammer in my hand. And it was a great motivator for me, because what I found out was I hated construction. I hated being out there in the dirt and hauling lumber. And so it was a great motivator for me, because I realized really quickly I didn't want to be a construction worker for the rest of my life. So I worked for about 3 years in construction while I was attending UCLA. And then after working those years, I decided that I knew I wanted to be in the business side of things, wearing a coat and tie, not a pair of work boots. And so I got my real estate license, and I started to work selling real estate. So again, I would go to UCLA in the morning, work selling real estate in the afternoon, and on the weekends. And so even you that follow finance, this was the early 1980s, and it was when our nation was in a really, really horrible recession, and interest rates were at 18% in 1982 and 1983. So right now, if you get a home mortgage, your interest rate's about 4%. So think about getting a mortgage at 18%. So the real estate market was dead. It was a really, really tough time for me to start the real estate business, but what it taught me was to work hard, and so that's what I did. So in 1984, I graduated and was fortunate enough to be able to go into what I dreamed of doing, which is real estate development. And my family, my business has been working in real estate development really since that time, here in Burbank and throughout Southern California. So when I return to kind of what we do, I'll kind of finish up and talk about what real estate development is and what real estate investment is as we get to that point. Yes?
I was just wondering, like, many people say, like, how they worked hard, but, like, not the definition of work hard, but what did you really do, like, during that working hard time, like, to get past that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Everybody says work hard.
Yeah.
What does that mean? So for me, I'll tell you what working hard was. As I wanted to get into the real estate development business, I started looking at investment properties, okay? And I found this piece of property in the multiple, that's where they list all the different properties that are for sale. And I knew that it would be a great place to build an apartment building. And our company at that point wasn't ready to build apartment buildings, and so I got on the phone and I started calling up all the developers I knew, trying to sell this piece of property where I knew they could build an apartment building. And I wasn't able to find anybody to sell it to. But one of the other brokers in my office was listening to me pitch this to all my people I was trying to sell. And so he took it to one of his clients and ended up selling them the property. And so, I've been working on this, and it was kind of taken out from under me, and I was so mad. So I got a list of all the other properties that were zoned for apartments in the city of Burbank, and I started calling the owners. And when I couldn't reach the owners, I would go knock on their door and say, are you interested in selling this property you have where we can build apartments? And they would slam the door in my face. And I'd go to the next one, and go to the next one. And then, eventually somebody said, well, I might consider selling it. So I got my foot in the door. And then I went, and then by that time, our company was gearing up to build apartments. And so I went back and forth between our company and this, and was able to broker a deal. And that was the first deal I put together, was being able to find this piece of property right here on Victory Boulevard in Naomi, I think. And so for me, that was working hard. Is instead of going home and reading the newspaper, it was out there on Saturday morning, knocking on doors, trying to get somebody to sell me a property, trying to get a listing. So that for me, that was taking it to the next step. So I'll return kind of to my business, and but I wanted to, I felt that if we keep going on, we're spending the whole hour talking about real estate investment, and well, that's really interesting. I did want to spend a few minutes touching on business ethics, because that's what your class is about, and that's what we've been studying. So, got really 3 observations about business ethics that I want you to consider. Your ethics in business and as an individual will be one of the most important taglines that you carry with you throughout your career. So I deal with literally hundreds of business people in my life, and each of them, whether you know it or like it or not, has a reputation. And much of that reputation is based upon how people perceive your business ethics. So, as you're starting, you're young, all of you have, flawless credentials when you go out to the market. But how will your reputation evolve over time? Will your reputation be someone that always stabs somebody in the back, that takes advantage of a situation? Or will you develop a reputation for being an ethical person? So it's really important. And one of the things to consider is that once you get a bad rap, once people think that you're not a fair dealer, it's really, really hard to change that. The second observation that I want you to consider is that your ethics will come into play much more frequently than you know. So, when you talk about business ethics and you look at something up on the board, and you think, oh, this is something that the chairman of the company or the treasurer or somebody has to deal with. Well, it's not. It's something that you will deal with, on a weekly basis. In my business, it's on a daily basis. You have to make decisions, and you have to determine how you're going to respond to somebody that you're doing business with. The third thing that I want you to consider, and I don't know how this squares with everything that's in your book, but the difference between black and white, right or wrong, good or bad, is much blurrier in the real world than it is on the book. There isn't a crystal clear line down the middle where the decisions are cut and dry, where it's very easy to say, this is good, this is bad. Now, there are circumstances where it's clearly easy to differentiate right from wrong. You're the treasurer of a company, you steal money out of the account, obviously wrong, obviously illegal, obviously unethical. But those, quite frankly, aren't the type of decisions, they're not the type of things that you will face on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things you need to do is make some decisions early on how you're going to deal with ethical issues once you confront them. So what is ethics? What is an ethical decision? It's a difficult question to answer, and one that I suggest you contemplate. Now, there's legal and illegal, but that's not necessarily ethical and unethical. Now, a lot of times it is. Stealing money from your company is both illegal and unethical. But as we'll talk about some examples, there's some other things that may be legal, but then the question I raise is, are they necessarily ethical? So I want to talk about one of the issues that we deal with all the time in my business, and I want to pose it to you as an ethical question. So we build all types of buildings, apartment buildings, office buildings, restaurants, throughout Southern California. And part of the process for that is that we hire a contractor who actually builds the buildings. And that contractor will go out and solicit bids from each of the subcontractors that actually do the work. So you'll have one subcontractor that will do the windows, one subcontractor that does the floors, somebody else that does the doors, somebody else that does the concrete. So you hire all these specialties. And the way that you select those specialties is by what's called bidding. So you will get, say, 5 or 6 contractors for each trade that will come in, get a set of plans, and then they will tell you how much they will charge you to do the work. Okay, it's called the bidding process. And the bidding process is kind of the linchpin of contracting and development. But I'll tell you that in the industry, it is very, very common for one of the contractors to expect a favor, or maybe more of the contractors, and they will ask the developer or the contractor for what's called last look. Okay? Anybody guess what last look is? Last look is when all the bids are in, they want a chance to see everybody else's bid so they can lower their bid at the end and get the contract. Okay? Now, is that ethical? No. In private contracting, it's not illegal. Now, in public contracting, if you were bidding to build Burbank High School, that is illegal. You go to jail for it. But in private contracting, it's not illegal. But it happens all the time. And people do it routinely without thinking about the fact that it's unethical and that there's negative impacts. What about the other contractors that spend a lot of time and money bidding? And what about the whole system? The whole system breaks down if you don't have a fair playing field in which to bid. So I want to talk about another example, which for me is even more interesting and maybe a little bit more challenging. So I want to talk about a very technical finance term that I find very interesting. And so any of you that really follow finance, you might find this interesting. But I guess you talk just a little tiny bit about home mortgages, right? And you know how home mortgages work. You go to the bank and how you qualify for a home mortgage. Well, Wall Street would take all those home mortgages and turn them into bonds and sell the bonds to investors. Okay, so you guys know a little bit about how that works? Okay, so what they would do on Wall Street is then sell insurance on these bonds. So if you're a big pension fund, you could buy a bond and you would get the return from all these little homeowners that are making you payments, right? But if you weren't sure that if they were going to pay, you could buy insurance from a big insurance company. Okay, you guys follow that? Does that make sense? So you know, even if the homeowners go broke and don't pay, then the insurance company will pay you. Okay, so it's just like a house and you buy fire insurance. If your house burns down, the insurance company pays you so you're not out. So this is the same thing like fire insurance, but on these mortgages. Now the interesting thing is if you buy fire insurance, you have to own the house. Okay, does that make sense? Now to buy this mortgage insurance, you didn't have to own the bond. So what that means is when you're buying this insurance, you're betting that those bonds were going to go bad or default. So there's some really, really, really smart guys on Wall Street. A couple of them were Asperger's syndrome. I don't know, they were just really focused and they read all the fine print. And they figured out mathematically that some of these bonds had to default. 100% guarantee that they would default. And yet they were able to go out and buy insurance and make a fortune. So if you look at ethics, these guys figured out mathematically that they couldn't lose. And for about $1, you could buy this insurance, and then when bonds defaulted, you would get $100 reward. So they would go out and spend $10 million on an insurance premium on these bonds and get $1 billion a year later. Figured out mathematically, couldn't lose. And so there was a handful of these guys that went out and made a fortune buying insurance on bonds they didn't own. Now, is that ethical? You're buying insurance from an insurance company. The reason, has anybody heard of AIG, biggest insurance company in the world? AIG went broke, had to be taken over and bailed out by the United States government. And everybody says it was because of the mortgage market. Well, it wasn't really because of the mortgage market. It was because AIG sold all this mortgage insurance on bonds that ended up going into default. So this is a really interesting ethical question. The guys that bought the bonds, one of them was named John Paulson, who was a multi-billionaire on Wall Street. He took it a step further. He went to the insurance company and says, I hear you're selling this insurance. And they're, yeah, we'd love to sell you as much as you want to buy. And he said, let me pick exactly the bonds and exactly the loans that I want to buy the insurance on. So he was able to go into these bonds and find the ones that were made to the worst credit borrowers, that had the highest leverage and the highest interest rates. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel. He knew that these would default. And the insurance company said, hey, whatever bond you want, give us a list, we'll write the insurance. He made about $10 billion in the course of a couple years doing this. Completely legal. The insurance company knew exactly what he was doing. Now, why did the insurance company do this? Are they stupid? No. Wall Street was able to get Standard & Poor's, the bond rating agency, to rate these bonds at the same level as US government debt. They got AAA ratings. So the insurance companies figured, hey, these bonds can't go broke, they can't default, they got AAA rating. So they didn't do their homework. John Polson and these Asperger guys and all these really smart guys did their homework. So again, I ask you, is what they did ethical? It's not illegal. They got called up in front of some government panels that were really mad. They took that much money out of the system. But was it ethical? No. Tough question. You're John Polson working in Wall Street, and you're going to make billions. Tough decision. Tough decision. So anyway, those are just a couple the ethical things I want you to ponder. It's not always that easy, and you have to kind of know in yourself what's right and what's wrong. And can you sleep at night the next day? Can you look at a business colleague in the face, knowing that you haven't dealt fairly with him in a transaction? And briefly, I'll just give you another example. This is a little bit similar to the first example that I gave you. In my business, we buy and sell real estate all the time. We have multiple offers coming in at different prices. Puts a lot of pressure on. Do you manipulate that system by leaking out what the best price is, hoping to get a higher price? Not illegal. Probably unethical. So those are decisions you have to make. I'll close on the ethics thing.
That's a funny clock. That's the real clock.
Good. After I graduated from UCLA, I went to the business, and as I talked about, 1982 interest rates were at the highest they'd ever been in the history of the United States. And Ronald Reagan had been elected president, and he instituted a series of tax reforms and a whole series of economic recovery reforms, and interest rates dropped. And production in the United States took off. It was a wonderful time in the economic world from 1984 to 1989. That was just about the time I graduated from college. So I ran out and jumped in, and we went into real estate development, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But after that cooled for a little bit, I decided to go back and get my master's degree. And so I went to Pepperdine University and got my MBA. And I graduated from that program in 1994. And business ethics was a mainstay of the discussion that we had at Pepperdine. And so I was really, really fortunate to be able to have that experience and have those discussions at a relatively early phase in my career. And one of the fascinating things that we did in that program is one of our whole classes got on a plane and flew to Las Vegas and spent a day, 2 days and a night in the federal penitentiary at the Nellis Air Force Base. Okay? So on this Air Force Base is a prison for white-collar criminals. And to go in and spend 2 days talking to these guys, it's fascinating. And so these issues I'm talking about, are these shades of gray, is what you need to be careful of. And there was a insurance executive who had a huge insurance company, brokerage. And when you run an insurance brokerage, you sell insurance policies, and your clients write you a check, and it goes into what's called a trust account, which is other people's money that you can't touch. And then you eventually pay that money out to the individual insurance company. So you're like a fiduciary that just holds that money. And there's very strict laws that you can't touch that money. But it's just sitting there, and it makes no interest. And so this guy figured, if I just put $1 million into an interest-bearing account, I can just get the interest. I'll put the principal back. Nobody will ever know the difference. The money's not going anywhere. Nobody gets hurt. And he had 20 or 30 million dollars in this fund. He could make $500,000 or $600,000 a year. Nobody would ever know the difference. Nobody would get hurt. Everybody would get their money. Okay? Is that ethical? No, because you can't touch that money. It's not yours. It's certainly illegal. So this guy was a really smart guy, had this huge organization, gave money to philanthropy. He was in Chicago. But it turned out that his secretary was married to an FBI agent. And she would go home and start telling about how Bob was doing all these things, and he would scratch his head and said, that doesn't sound quite right. Well, a couple years later, he's living in the desert of Nevada at Nellis Correctional Facility. So, and he told us what happened. He says, you know, at first it was just we just did a quick little transaction. I made the money, and nobody knew. When the government will come in and audit your books, they tell you like a month ahead of time, they're coming in to audit your books. We had time to move the money back. Nobody would have ever gotten hurt. But it's illegal. And he went to jail. So think about those ethics issues. And one of the worst things you do is you take that first step. You make that first mistake and then you don't get caught. And you say, you know what? It's okay. And one of the other traps that you fall into is everybody's doing it. If you ever see the movie Wall Street with Charlie Sheen, if you haven't seen the Wall Street movie with Charlie Sheen, he goes to his college roommate's office, and the college roommate is a lawyer. And Charlie Sheen says, you know, just give me a little bit of information. You make so much money that you won't know what to do with all the money. And the lawyer looks and says, yeah, but you know, it's illegal. Charlie Sheen looks at it and says, everybody's doing it. Okay? And that was the hook. He ended up going to jail. So, any other thoughts, questions about business ethics before I talk about real estate investment?
Within the last month, have there been any major ethical dilemmas that you faced that you can share?
We were trying to buy a really large parcel of real estate about 3 weeks ago. And we offered almost full price, and somebody else had been in front of us, and it was pretty far in the negotiations with the seller. They didn't want to change. And so I was a little bit frustrated, so I called their broker up and I was complaining a little bit. And without me asking, he told me more information than he probably should have. It maybe presented me with a way to kind of steal the deal back from the other person that was almost finished with it by offering more money. And so if I wanted to do that, I probably could have written a new offer at a higher price, submitted for more money, and maybe gotten the deal. But I didn't do that. And part of my reasoning is, first of all, it wasn't ethical. I've spent my entire career creating a reputation for being ethical and for being someone you can trust. And I will say this, we have been one of the most active buyers of real estate for the past 3 years. We've acquired 36 or 38 new properties. And one of the reasons that we've been able to buy so many properties is the selling community knows that when we say we're going to do something, we do it. And so having that reputation is worth money. It's worth value because I'm able to buy properties that other people would like to buy, but people will sell them to me because they know I'm going to treat them fairly. So I chose not to do it. It wasn't ethical, and I didn't feel good about doing the deal that way. Anyway, so let's talk about real estate investment. What my business is what time is class actually up?
Like 12:15.
Okay. So anyway, I'm going to leave some time at the end for some questions. So hopefully you guys will be thinking of some questions. Because I hope that this will be more meaningful to you if I can bring it to you in kind of the real world. So my business is real estate investment. In the newspapers, people call you a real estate developer. That's not really what we do. Our core business is to acquire income-producing real estate and hold it for the long term. Basically, hold it forever and charge rent. And that's how we make our income, is the rent from those assets that we own. So there's two ways for us to acquire the assets that we want to own. The first is you can buy them. So we are out in the market every week buying assets. The second way that you can acquire those assets is to develop them from scratch. That is, you buy an existing piece of property, you tear down what's there, and you build something new. And both of them are very exciting, and they're both two things that we do very actively. So what's interesting for you econ majors is that whether we buy or develop is really a function of the market. So the markets are constantly changing. So there are periods of time when it's much, much more profitable to buy raw land and build new projects. There are other times when the economy slows that people have built these great projects but can't afford to keep them, and it's cheaper for us to go buy somebody else's projects and build our own. So we do both. So if anyone's interested in that aspect of the business, buying and selling, the real estate brokerage business is a fascinating business, and it's one that if you're willing to work hard, you can be very successful at, and you don't need a family business to get into. You don't need a lot of capital to start. What you need is to be very, very aggressive. Interestingly, there was a kid that went to school here, probably 5 or 6 years ago, named Troy Steer. I don't know if you've heard of the name. And he interned for me just while he was at Burbank High, and then he came to work after he interned. Worked for us for about 2 years and went directly into being a real estate broker. And so when he was 21 or 22, was making an enormous amount of money, really about the time he would have been graduating from college, because he was a really, really hard worker. How do you be a hard worker? You're knocking on doors, you're calling, if you're cold calling, you're sending out letters, you're working. So for anyone that's interested in real estate but not quite sure how they get into it, the real estate brokerage business is interesting. And I actually brought a list of the 37 deals that we've closed if anyone's interested in taking a look at it.
Well, look, I myself, I'm interested in getting into real estate. Like, what is the first thing that I could do, like, to get involved in it, to have more knowledge, and like start my process?
Well, a lot of that's going to depend on what your individual circumstances are. First of all, the more education you can get, the better off you will be. So if you can get a college degree, that will put you head and shoulders against people that don't have a college degree. Is it necessary? Not critical. My dad ended up becoming one of the biggest brokers in the state of California, never went to college. Corey Stair went to Burbank High, is doing great in brokerage without college, but it's a handicap, okay? So get as much education as you can get, and then you network, you intern. One of the best ways that you can actually learn the business is by watching somebody do it. So finding an internship, either with a brokerage company, a developer, a construction company, anyone that's working in the business is probably one of the best ways to get into it. So, yes.
How do you determine the best area to buy property?
That's a great question. So, in the real estate industry, the top 3 things that you look for at real estate are location, location, location. Okay, that's an old real estate joke. Buying in the best locations for us, because we have a very long-term perspective, is critical. Okay, you've been able to buy apartments, say in Phoenix, Arizona, or Las Vegas, Nevada, for years at a fraction of the price that they cost to buy in Burbank. But we don't buy in Las Vegas, or we don't buy in Phoenix, because those markets are not protected like the Burbank market is. So how many of you ever heard the concept of a barrier to entry? Okay.
We learned a lot of
Okay, as we know, a barrier to entry is something that makes it hard for people to compete with you. Now, if you go to Phoenix, all you have to do is buy a big stretch of desert and build whatever you want. There's no barriers to entry. So as soon as rents start to go up, everybody runs out there and builds more apartments in Phoenix. So the value of those apartments, supply and demand, right, will never increase to the level that they will in an area like Burbank. Same thing in Nevada, lots of desert, go build. Now, if you want to build apartments in Burbank, it's almost impossible, okay? So Burbank has 42,000 households and 105,000 jobs. So what does that mean? There's more people working in Burbank than living in Burbank. So Burbank is a net importer of labor. So there'll always be a lot of demand, but it's almost impossible to build apartments here. So what does that mean? That means that vacancy levels will always be really low and rents will always be going up. So for us, we try to really focus on prime locations. Okay? So anyway, let me talk a little bit about, again, any questions, chime in, about our investment business. What we want to do is own these assets, collect the rent forever. So as I mentioned, we own a lot of apartment units throughout Burbank and Southern California. We own a lot of senior apartments. And you say, well, why would you do senior apartments? Isn't that kind of a lot of work? It is a lot of work. But if you look at our demographic in the state of California, we are all getting older. And seniors are defined as somebody being 55 years of age. And you know, I'm like right around the corner. And if you look at the number of people between 55, and how people are living, it's not, unusual for people to be 80, 85, 90 years old. The population for seniors is exploding. It's a huge demographic, and there are very few people that are doing really high quality senior apartments. So that's a really fantastic part of our portfolio. I don't know if any of you know where Olive Park is, directly across the street from where the plane is. It's a great big senior apartment building. That's actually an affordable senior housing project that we built. If you know where Bell Jeff High School is, directly across the street is a really high-end luxury senior apartment complex that we built. So again, other properties that we built. You know where Chase Bank is on the corner of First and Olive? Nice granite building. That was when I first came out of college. I was 21. The economy was just taking off, and that corner was available. And so that was an opportunity for me to kind of really hit the ground running. And we built that granite office building, the Elephant Bar restaurant, and the parking structure behind it. Yes.
Have you determined like when?
Great question. Great question. There's a real art to determining what rental pricing is, and there's actually companies that do all the research, that will call up every landlord and ask them how much their rent is. We don't use that because we have so many apartments, we kind of have a good feel for the market, and what we will do is we will test pricing. So what we will do is if we think that we're at the market and then a unit becomes available, we'll price that next unit higher, let's say $100 a month higher, and see if it rents. Now if it rents, we know, okay, so our other prices are too low. If it doesn't rent, then we'll lower the price back down to where it does rent. But so being able to determine current prices is not that hard. What's hard is being able to predict future prices. So if I'm looking at a project that I want to build today, but it's not going to be open for 3 years, how do I know what the rents are going to be in 3 years? That's tougher to gauge. So
Sorry.
let me talk about a new project we're building. So this is an example, but
I was wondering, is it better off to, let's say, have an affordable price for a house and sell it as soon as possible, or have a high price and wait for the customer to want, like?
Great question. I guess it's somewhere in between. There's certain people, whether you're selling a house or renting an apartment, they hold out to get the very, very, very highest price they can, and that takes time. And then sometimes you never get it sold. We try to really know where the market is and try to kind of, if you can get that price right, you know, from the beginning, that's where you're trying to be. And it's hard, but that's what we'll be trying to do. So, let's talk a little bit about real estate development. One of the things about my job that is so interesting is that when you do real estate development, it's really an art. It's really an expression of art. You start with a blank piece of paper, and you can build anything you want until somebody tells you you can't. So you have to, when you start on a project, you say, what does the market want? What will the city allow? What's financially feasible? So one of the most fun things for me as a developer is taking the site plan, which is just a vacant ground, and sitting down with the architect and beginning to design a project. I guess maybe like an artist starting a painting. For me, that is the most fun, is trying to decide what to build. So it's probably before your time, but at the senior apartment complex that we have right across from Bell Jeff, that used to be Burbank Community Hospital. And so it was an old, dilapidated hospital that was falling down. And I remember meeting with the architect and beginning to sketch out what we wanted to do. Now I go to that building, it's been there for 10 years. There's a beautiful pool, beautiful gym, huge community areas, libraries, all these really, really fantastic amenities that we were able to figure out how to design and how to make cost effective with the architect. And so that's really, really a fun process. So the site you're looking at is a really, really interesting piece of property here in Burbank. And it's located on Olive Avenue, directly across the street from NBC Studios. You guys know where that's at? Does anybody know where there's a steakhouse called Arnie Morton's? Directly across the street, there's 2 blocks that that we own. And it was a very, very complicated process to buy that because there's 24 individual pieces of property. There's a restaurant, there's a church, there's office buildings, there's houses, there's apartments, 24 separate pieces of property that we had to buy up and get all consolidated into one site. And so this is the type of real estate development that is really, really exciting and really fun for me as a real estate developer. So on this site, we're going to build a Whole Foods market. For you that are familiar with Whole Foods, it's like the most fantastic grocer in the market. And on top of that, we're going to put 141 apartments. And these will be super high amenity apartments with a lap pool, with a gym, with anything that you can imagine. And what we're trying to do is create a new type of housing opportunity, a housing opportunity where you can live, where you don't have to be as dependent upon your car. So if you think about this, if you live in this building, instead of going to the supermarket, you go downstairs and go to Whole Foods. You get up in the morning, instead of getting in your car and driving to Starbucks, you go down to Whole Foods because they've got their little coffee shop area. And then instead of going to the gym, you don't need to go to the gym because we've got the gym there in the facility. Whole Foods will also have a full sit-down restaurant. So if you need lunch, you pop down to Whole Foods, or you call and they can deliver it up to your apartment. The greatest concentration of employment is the studios. This is directly across the street from Warner Brothers, directly across the street from NBC, directly across the street from Clear Channel. Now, do you guys know what Clear Channel radio is? Every radio station that you listen to, KISS, 100.3, 101, all of those radio stations all broadcast from Burbank. They broadcast from that building that's directly across the street. All of those guys, who's the disc jockey? Ryan Seacrest, that's where he does his broadcast from. And it sounds like there's 10 individual stations, they're all in the same office. They all have the same support staff. All of those people are right across the street from where this building would be. And so our expectation is that for those people that live in Pasadena or live in downtown, if you can walk across the street to work, would you do it? If we offer you a good enough property. And that's who we're targeting, yes.
How would you like determine the cost of the rent living there? Because across the street, you want the people to live there, but then you also have the pool, the gym, and the whole foot under, and you wanna be able to pay for those.
Great question. How do we price that? So, what we actually, for this pricing model, this was actually a project for the Graduate School of Business at Woodbury University. They looked at this and they came up with a pricing model. And how did they do it? They tried to find all of the comparable super high amenity projects in Southern California. So, have you ever been to the Americana on Brand? That has really great apartments. So they looked and they said, how much are they getting at the Americana at Brand? About $4,000 a month, exactly. So they're saying, you know what? This project can be better than the Americana at Brand. It's going to be closer to transportation. It's going to have better amenities. But we can start to think about, okay, $4,000 a month. Maybe that's a threshold where we can do our pricing. And have you ever been to Pasadena, Paseo, Colorado? Downtown Pasadena. They've got great apartments there. So when we're looking at apartments that are different than what Burbank offers, we have to go to the surrounding areas and kind of see what they're doing, and that's how we get our pricing model.
How does the agreement work with, like, let's say, for Cusmano and Cusmano themselves? Like, how do you say, here's my idea, like, would you?
So interesting, we deal with some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies in the world. We do a lot of business with Disney, Amgen, Chase, big companies. So how do you get an entree, right? How do you kind of get with them? And a lot of it has to do with reputation. So because we've been in this area for so long, and that's when I talk about ethics. When I talk about your reputation is your calling card, it precedes you. And so Whole Foods Market tried to get to Burbank 5 years ago. I don't know if any of you were aware of that. 5 or 7 years ago, they tried to get in and they weren't able to. And so when they decided they wanted to come back, what do? They call up the city. They talk to brokers. Who should we talk to try and get to Burbank? And so you have that reputation, and you've had a history of dealing fairly with other brokers, and you haven't, taken advantage of people, and that's how you get a reputation. And so they contacted us, and they said, look, we understand that you are a great developer. You may have an opportunity to find us a home. What can you do for us? And so I get calls all the time from really great companies.
So was the apartment idea, like, portrayed out after you called me?
Yeah, so they didn't really care what the entire project looked like, as long as they got to be there. And so the apartment angle came from us. So let me just tell you, our first angle was Whole Foods and a bunch of shops. Now, if you're a small shopper, let's say you're a Chase Bank, or you're a nail salon, or you're anything else, you will die to be next to a Whole Foods. Because Whole Foods does this huge volume. So we've had all these other shops that we're gonna make a lot of money on, with Whole Foods as the anchor. So Whole Foods got the plan, they looked at it and said, wow, this is fantastic, but get rid of all those other guys, it's only us. So they said, we want to be your exclusive retailer. So that was the concession that we made with them, is that they're the only retailer. So all the signage, it's all gonna be Whole Foods. They don't want to compete with Chase or anyone else.
One question, wouldn't that kind of decrease the competition? Because let's say there's a nail salon, like let's say some woman wants to go to the nail salon and then they could shop at the Whole Food Market. Wouldn't that make both sides more money and then more money for you guys?
It would, but that's not how they look at it. They want to dominate. And so what we did though, and that's a great question. So here's the alternative that we came up with. We're trying to create a wonderful experience for our tenants. So we're putting a nail salon in the residential area. We're also putting a private hair salon, a gym. We're having a private massage area. We're gonna have a private dog grooming area. All these things up in the residential part. And why are we doing this? Again, back to this thing that I want to make it so you don't have to use your car. You want to take your dog room, you get in the elevator, you don't get in the garage. We will have an ATM, so you need to deposit your check. There's not a Chase Bank, but you can make your deposit with your ATM and not have to use your car. And all of this, what it is leading up to is that this will be the first LEED certified building, residential building in the city of Burbank. So you know what LEED certified is?
No,
No. Okay. LEED certified is the national accreditation for green buildings. And so it's this very expensive process that you go through. that if you're going to build a truly green building, they will certify it as being LEED certified. There's not another LEED certified residential building in the city of Burbank, so I'll talk real quick and then we'll get you. This building will have a heating system, a solar heating system, that will heat the hot water from where it comes in from the curb at like 50 degrees up to 100 degrees. And then when it goes into the hot water heaters, it only has to be raised from 100 degrees to like 130 degrees. So it cuts the gas consumption by about 70%. So you're using 70% less natural gas. We will have solar electrical panels on the roof that will provide solar power for the property. We will have hundreds of bike spaces, and there will be a dedicated bike shop. So like, you know, we all like to ride our bikes, but whenever you go out, it's got a flat tire. So this will have a little bike shop with, you know, compressed air and all those sort of things. We want to encourage bicyclists. Let me get her and we'll come back over.
Would you consider the apartments levels?
Very much so. Yeah, so they'll have granite countertops. And the other thing is when we design this, we tried to design an alternative to a home. So the average home in Burbank was really built in the 40s and 50s. And the average home in Burbank is like 1,000 square feet. Okay? These apartments range from about 950 square feet to about 3,000 square feet. So these are huge apartment homes. They will have full kitchens with, you know, stainless steel gourmet appliances, granite countertops. So yeah, it will be truly luxury. So we'll be right here and then we'll go back in.
Was the idea of the new research to make the rent more expensive?
No, so the question is, was the LEED certified to make the rent more expensive? No. Couple issues on LEED certified. Because we have to go through a very, very, very in-depth entitlement process with the city of Burbank, they have to approve all this. I knew that one of the ways to get them really engaged and get them really on board was to make it LEED certified. So that was one of the thought processes. I said, the city's gonna love this.
Yeah.
And the second thing is I looked at who's our target tenant. Our target tenant works across the street at Warner Brothers. Our target tenant maybe drives a Prius or a Volt. Our target tenant is gonna really, really like the fact that this is LEED certified, that it uses less energy. So part of it was the city, part of it was marketing. It wasn't so much economic. And I'll also say, we will have lots and lots of charging stations. So in my family, we have 2 electric cars. We have a Fisker and we have a Volt. They're plug-in cars. And so our client, tenant, who we see will be living there, probably pretty good chances they'll plug in car.
What year do you expect this to be?
Okay. We had hoped that we were actually gonna break ground on this in July of this year, but the process of the city is very, very arduous. Barriers to entry, okay? It costs millions of dollars just to get these plans to the city and takes a lot of time. And so because this project is so huge, it may not mean a lot to you, but it's 405,000 square feet. It's an enormous project. It takes up 2 city blocks. The city is making us do, or will probably be making us do what's called an environmental impact report, or an EIR, which is an exhaustive report on traffic, greenhouse gases, shadows, everything that this could possibly do to impact the city needs to be analyzed. So, long story short, I'm hoping that we will actually be under construction by the end of this year, and it'll open up just over about 2 years after that. Back there.
Are you just renting these apartments, or are there gonna be for sale?
No, that's a great question. So let's think back to where we started at when I told you what we do. What do? We own assets that we can own forever and collect the rent. Now, that's not what all developers do, because there's a ton of money that can be made in doing for sale product or doing condominiums. So we could finish these and sell them and make a ton of money. But then what do? You have to give half of it to the government in taxes, and then you're left with what you're left, but you don't have that annual income. What we want to do is collect that rent every single year for the next 50 years. So we'll answer your question, we're not going to sell them, we're going to rent those apartments.
We're gonna get bailed out here,
Yeah.
and I hate that when it happens, so maybe
You know
Diana,
what?
you can,
Let's finish right here, and then I can hang around for a few minutes if
Okay.
anybody wants to chat. I also,
terrific.
if anyone has any interest at all in looking at, I brought my resume, kind of see some of the things I've done or anything else, I'll be glad to share it with you guys. So let's take one last question and we'll wrap up.
I was just wondering, like, big companies, let's say like Whole Foods, do they have like a standard of like a minimal, like how big their store can
Yeah.
be, and then you have to get them, or is it like?
Yeah, no, so another good question. So Whole Foods started as a relatively small company, and so if you go into a lot of the Whole Foods markets, they're kind of small, they're about 25,000 square feet. And because what they love about this is that, just like when I started designing the project, I loved it, same for them. Because they have a clean sheet of paper. They can design exactly what they want. So for example, they want an outdoor dining area. They want a sit-down restaurant. So this Whole Foods is pretty big. It's about 43,000 square feet, which is about the size of maybe, I don't know if you know the Bonds Pavilion on Alameda. It's kind of about that size. But if you see what Whole Foods does, when you go to their store, it's truly amazing. I mean, they have these fresh squeezed juices of like 20 different fruits and vegetables. Just great stuff. So we'll do one more. Yes. It was very, very much like what I went down.
Is this your biggest project?
This particular project is the biggest project we've ever done. Yeah.
So are you like nervous or are you guys pretty, like confident about it?
I'm both. I'm very, very, very confident that this will be a huge, huge success. But it's an enormous amount of work, and it requires an enormous amount of money up front.
It certainly takes up a lot of space to build Whole Foods. Is this market available to anyone that wants to, like, if people don't live in the apartment
Absolutely.
complexes?
It's open to the public, and they have actually 2 levels of underground parking, 1 level on grade and 1 below that. They'll actually have about 300 parking spaces for the public.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
A lot of parking.
How do you determine
A lot of parking.
Excuse me?
How do you determine the name of the
How do we describe, okay. So, this is great, so, okay, so, we're really boring, and we come up with really boring names for project. So, when I started this project, the name of the project was Burbank Media Village. Okay, Burbank Media Village. And we have this whole team, we have a development team, when you get the architects, the engineers, the consultants, and the lead people, it takes up a room like the size of this room. And so one of our consultants says, you know, this is a great project, we're in love with it, but that name's gotta go. I'm like, what's wrong with Burbank Media Village? And he says, you know what, it's not sexy, it doesn't have pizzazz. And so he was doing focus groups. Who knows what a focus group is? He was doing focus groups for Porsche, for a Porsche dealer. And so he says, the same groups I'm doing for the Porsche dealer, I want to do for yours. And so they came up with like 10 names, and the focus group, like far and away, picked Tolaria. Tolaria for me.
I like it.